You're probably wondering why I'm here. Well, I'm Hack for FingerCramp, and I'm sort of an arcade stick aficionado, and Andre asked me, and he thought I'll be best fit to explain why controllers and arcade sticks both suck. I'm actually going to explain the differences and see why neither one is above the other. But before that, he told me to make sure you watch part 3, and he told me to stand around for a bit. It's over a second. All right, I hope you enjoyed it. Now welcome to part 4 of the Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 Babies Guide. I'm Hack, let's get into it. I get this question all the time. What is better, an arcade stick or a gamepad? Well, to keep it short, neither. It actually boils down to what I believe is practice, preference, and the games you're playing them on. Practice being self-explanatory. Next, we're up to preference. What are you most comfortable with? You as a player, if you're playing on a gamepad, if you're getting your moves out 98% of the time, I say you're fine. But if it's something that you see yourself dropping combos a lot and you've been playing on this device a long time, you might want to try out the other device. I wouldn't say go in as far as going, hey, invest the $150 into this arcade stick, try it out, and find out you don't like it, because I've seen a lot of gamepad players who were good on the gamepad switch over to arcade sticks to find them play better, which will never actually happen. What ended up happening was they would put these arcade sticks away to collect dust, and then themselves will go back to a gamepad. So find a friend, try it out. Honestly, if you're comfortable with the arcade stick or gamepad, stick to that. The last one is the games you're playing them on. This isn't 20 years ago where we would see people trying to emulate the arcade experience, which is why arcade sticks were actually made. This is exactly opposite now. We have the home consoles being the leading development actual devices for developers themselves like Capcom, so we would see them actually trying to cater their games towards 4-button controllers or 8-button PlayStation 3, 10-button Microsoft Xbox 360 controllers, because they're more widely available. That's the whole point. Arcade sticks aren't as widely available since consoles and the home experience is what's key. They're going to be building these games around that, as you can see, with more simpler, I'm not saying simpler actual technical wise, but simpler controller wise is like UMVC 3, Blaze Blue, and KOF 13, which only has 5 buttons. So you can easily see yourself actually migrating maybe back to gamepads, as people were a few years ago going from gamepads to arcade sticks. Well, after this, I'm gonna actually break them both down, show you the pros and cons of each, and maybe you can actually make your decision on that. I'm gonna split these into 2 different categories to make everything simple. One being gamepad and controllers, the other being arcade sticks. Both pros and cons on each side. So let's start off with arcade stick. Arcade stick owners will always deny this, saying that it's actually better, ergonomic, whatever. But I think the first reason for people to get arcade sticks is nostalgia. Nostalgia, nostalgia, nostalgia. A lot of these arcade stick users are nostalgic because they were part of an arcade stick generation, which actually ended maybe about 10 or 5 or 6 years ago for most people. I'd say 10. But at the same time, they're nostalgic for a time that they were enjoying going to these arcades or these different game centers and playing these games. So maybe it doesn't even come down to actually having better times on these arcades, but more of the lines of they're bringing back good memories. It's bigger than you think. Next up is for controller side is they're readily available and cheaper. Tell me how often can you go to your friend's house and go, hey, let me get a DualShock 3, let me get an Xbox 360 wireless controller, and they have it available. But how many times are you gonna go over, hey, let me get a Mad Catz TE or a Hori VLX or something? You won't find that to be the case half the time, because controllers are more widely available, and bigger thing is they're cheaper. I know you're saying to yourself, hey, Hack, I can get an arcade stick for about $60 now, but to be totally honest, the $60 arcade stick is probably not worth your money. You might as well use a driving wheel to play on it, because what it comes down to is parts and how sturdy they are. So let's get back to arcade sticks now. Point number 2 is actually a pro for an arcade stick. The buttons are contoured to your fingers. I know before with the American layout, which would have the buttons straight, this wasn't the case as much, but ever since Street Fighter 4 came out, we've seen a resurgence, and we've seen sticks using the Astro City layout and even the Vulix layout, which actually contour to your fingers better, have a nice little curve, and your fingers are readily available for each button for quick responses. This is all good, but like I mentioned before, a lot of games might not require it, so maybe using your thumb like you use on a controller isn't that bad. Well, the second point I like to make for controllers is they're easy to carry. Unlike sticks, as you've seen, they are big and sometimes kind of heavy to lug around with you to different tournaments and stuff. So you always got to keep that in mind when if you're a tournament player or not. Like even if you're going to a friend's house, you want to keep something that can easily fit in your back of your pocket. I don't know what kind of stick you have in the back of your pocket, but pretty sure it sucks if it fits in your back of your pocket. Number 3 is actually a pro for the arcade stick, which is the joystick itself. A lot of users have said that using a joystick feels more natural than actual D-pad. If you realize that when you're using a joystick and moving down, you're actually pulling the joystick down, which is a little different action than pressing down on a D-pad, which is like pressing a button. So you actually know you're moving down because you're pulling it down. It's a little weird, but it's more of the feeling the joystick gives you, because once you hit that down action, you actually could go down through the micro switch, and when you push up, you're up. So there's no doubt that you're pressing down, because let's say for some reason your finger slipped and you're pressing down on the up part or the down part, you'll never know the difference. In most cases, on most D-pads in general, especially a PlayStation D-pad. But it's something that a lot of users who I've spoken to about this subject say it's a big deal to them, since holding down back may not be the easiest thing on a D-pad. You might want to switch over to an arcade stick, which make it easier with different gates and stuff like that. Well, the third point I would like to bring up about controllers is they have both a D-pad and an analog stick available to you. Honestly, I really think this is a huge benefit because it actually caters to both types of players. You might see users using D-pads who pick characters such as Guile and stuff who use charge motions, but people who use Ryu and motion characters will use the analog stick, since hitting those corners is not that hard. And if you actually think about it, getting to one corner and to another corner on an actual controller is a little faster, since the actual throw or the distance between each of the ends is much shorter. If you just look at the hardware wise, to get an arcade stick from one corner to the other, it's going to take longer from a little tiny D-pad or a little tiny analog stick to the other. So that's something to actually pay attention to, because any of those frames matter when doing these moves. As we said in part 1 of the guys, it all comes down to the frames, and actual performing moves cost frames too. So that's always that comes into the meta game when you're playing. One thing I would like to bring into the fray is the idea of the tournament environment. A lot of players don't realize, this is where I would say logistically one device may have an advantage over the other. In this case, I would give it to the pad, only because if you really think about it, arcade sticks are hard to carry, and they're honestly hard to keep stable for the most part. It's hard to get that home experience outside when using an arcade stick. For example, a lot of players hit the floor, but if you're not the same level that you're playing, let's say your knees are a little lower, a little higher if you play on your lap, you move around a lot, you might mess up a motion just because of that. And it's hard to get that experience everywhere you go, unless you carry around a small table, have the same exact feng shui wherever you need to go. It's hard to emulate it with an arcade stick, even though you have this big rugged controller. When you hold in a gamepad, it's there, it's always there. You can hold it at the same height, same whatever you want at all times, since it's not that heavy. But other benefits of a gamepad are the fact that it's quiet. People don't actually realize how much your opponent or somebody you're sitting next to and playing against is actually listening to your buttons. A lot of you players play online and you don't have to actually worry about this, but I've been to many tournaments where I've seen top players hit a button that has no use on the stick to make another player next to them think that they're actually pressing something. But when you're using a gamepad, no one knows what you're doing, since it's so quiet. When you're pressing buttons, making lots of noise, yada yada yada. Oh, people who live in a house with other people will actually attest to this too. Like, how hard is it to play a game at night when people are trying to sleep? That's why controllers are your savior. So that may be another reason why you're using controllers or gamepads and trying to be more comfortable with them. Alright, as you can see, the controller won that one on tournaments, because I honestly think they are better and they're more convenient, since they can easily fit in your backpack. They're stealthy, and for the most part, the functionality of a stick isn't needed in most of these new games, since stuff like shortcuts, etc, etc. But now I'm going to show you how to use both. One thing with, look at this conveniently placed arcade, I don't know where that came from, is that people are having troubles actually getting motions out on arcade sticks. A lot of people do a lot of this, but they don't realize with these new Sanwa type joysticks or Japanese style is that they're really sensitive. So top players such as Justin Wong and Andre use 2 fingers to actually control this. I would honestly recommend anybody using these sticks to figure out what feels most comfortable in, if it's like ring finger in the front, ring finger in the back. I'll show you a few pictures here. As you can see, the 2-finger one is extremely popular. There's a 3-finger one with 2 fingers in the back and the thumb in the front. And players such as Marlon Pie even cup the whole bowl and play like this. It's honestly, it's up to the person themselves. What do you feel most comfortable with? Do not worry, we'll put Daigo's preferred stick grip over there too, so you can be just like Daigo. But find out what you're most comfortable with, practice with that grip, and make sure you can be consistent at all different levels. If you're leaning forward, leaning back, which is a huge deal when using an arcade stick. Let's actually get into different ways to use a controller. All right, so is your standard Xbox 360 controller with that rotating D-pad. Is useless for now, but the things that there's two ways to actually grip a controller: is the claw grip and the regular grip. The regular grip being your index finger on the LB, RB, and then your middle finger on the triggers. And for most part, it works out for most games, especially for newer games such as Marvel vs. Capcom 3, where your face buttons amount to LMHS, with S being A, and then your assist right here. So that's all, and you can use these buttons for stuff like dashing, which a lot of pad players are doing. So it makes their dashing life even easier. So that's actually something to think about if you're starting to play Marvel vs. Capcom. Hey, I have a 1-button dash on the D-pad. Might want to use it. So, and the claw grip being when you have multiple fingers on the front, it actually originated from Halo, where they would use their middle finger as a trigger finger and have their pointer finger on the front, as you see here, and use their thumb to control, so they never have to let go of the thumbstick. But as you can see, you're not using the thumbstick that often or at all when playing fighting games, so you can leave your thumb there, have these for assist, and it actually works out pretty well. You see amazing players like Master CJ placing extremely high in tournaments using a pad itself. So figure out what kind of grip you're using. Claw grip, claw grip is probably most recommended for Mad Catz 5 pads. You probably see a picture here because all three of their face buttons are on front, or some of the Mahori Commander Series pads. Honestly, don't see those that often at tournaments. Most top players who are using pads are using the generic PlayStation pad. So it really comes down to this again.
How do I get better?
To be blunt, practice. Honestly, go into practice mode, pick your character, whoever it may be, but I recommend Zangief, and practice doing SPDs, which is a 270-degree motion. Most people do 360. Something I was saying before, you're actually wasting time. So, practice complex motions like that, or even supers. Something like Ryu's Fireball Super, which is double Hadouken forward with a punch. Make sure that you're only doing 2 Fireball motions or quarter circle forward motions and nothing extra. I'll show you an example of what's good over here and what looks bad over here. So as you can see in the bad one, I had a little up motion, the super came out, but that was the frame wasted or time wasted when I could have just been out in this. So make sure your motions are precise, practice complex moves, the better you'll be with your actual device.
What is going to be the controller of the future?
To be honest, the choice of controller is going to be the Gamepad, only because it's more widely available, and developers themselves are going to cater their experience to the bigger market. It makes the most sense. Honestly, what I hope happens is we get a universal Gamepad or whatever we decide to do, which I think is eventually going to happen because a lot of the games are being catered towards Gamepads more, such as 3D fighters like Tekken are actually preferred on the Gamepad over stick, most would say. And I've seen the best players from Tekken using Gamepads all the time. I just hope it happens sooner than later, because if you look at every other different esports genre, you see StarCraft users or Warcraft users, they mouse and keyboard, and that's it. Halo shooters or whatever, it comes down to the Gamepad controller itself. It's never a racing wheel versus a controller. And I honestly think the differences between an arcade stick and the Gamepad are that severe on a hardware level. So just to keep it short, Gamepads are the way to go.
Can't I just buy a cheap arcade stick?
This is a question I get all the time, since the prices of arcade sticks are dropping all over the board. You can find a nice stick for maybe $120, which is still a huge investment. You can find an amazing controller for about $60. So I would actually recommend buying a $60 controller over a $60 arcade stick any day. As I mentioned earlier in the tutorial, is the fact that a cheap arcade stick is, you might as well be playing with a driving wheel, because it comes down to the parts, and a lot of these parts are Sanwa grade or Japanese high grade parts, which actually can last over 1 million hits or whatever the numbers are, but they last a long time, they're rugged, and I wouldn't stay away from these smaller sticks since they move a lot more and they shift a lot during fights. Keep away, save up your money. If you can get an arcade stick, get the right stuff. You don't want to be there sitting at your friend's house with a broken stick, because the parts are much cheaper on those. After all that's been said, one thing I would like to make clear is that like I mentioned in the beginning, it all comes down to personal preference and people who are giving themselves personal mental blocks when using their devices. You know, fight through these things. It doesn't actually come down to the controls. That's what I was trying to make it most important. It comes down to the player themselves. And if you're playing hard on your device in these current games, which I said before, if the games are catered towards your device, then maybe it's better to use that. Imagine playing a Mario Paint without the mouse and keyboard. You were at a deficit. And it probably wasn't as fun. It definitely wasn't as fun. There's something to think about. So UMVC 3 and SSF4, I honestly think that both arcade stick players and gamepad players on the same level. So maybe in the next 5 years, I think the gamepad will be up here, but who knows? Only time will tell. So continue using your gamepad, enjoy it, and with all that being said, I want to thank you for watching part 4 of the Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 Babies Guide. I was your host, Hack, and please stay tuned for next week's episode, which is going to be movement. We go over wave dashing, how to P-Link air dash, car dash in the air, and how to do it properly, which matters the most. And as you all know, please send your questions or mention us on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter for the latest updates and like us on Facebook. It always helps. We want to thank you guys for watching this series, and hopefully everyone's getting better at the same time. And last but not least, thanks again.